another installment of Kickin It with Kathleen. I'm very happy to be here and talking to you again. I have a visitor today, Vivian Price, our Assistant Superintendent of Education for Personalized Learning. We're going to talk about some of the biggest questions that people have around this time of the year, the testing time of the year. So let's start.
Let's
start with our first question.
Okay, so we've been talking about this a lot, as you mentioned. The question that keeps coming up is, are we testing our students too much?
Yeah. So what would you say to that?
Well, I would say their concerns are valid. It's a great conversation to have, but we know that there's actually research that says testing is good for students. It's actually good for retaining knowledge. So there's this phenomenon known as like the testing effect, where actually research shows that the more students take a test, they are retaining information and able to retrieve that information. And actually, it's interesting because one of the better known studies says if a student just uses like study skills, underlines, summarizes, just rereads and rereads, it doesn't have the same effect. So that's one of the things that I would say. And of course, the other thing I would say is, and maybe we'll address after, the importance of formative assessment.
Right. Formative assessment meaning the kind of assessment that you can use to change your instruction afterwards based on the feedback you get from that test.
That's right.
So as opposed to the CASP test, which is a summative test, we don't get any data that's really usable from that, other than just seeing how the school is doing at large. But I will also say to this idea of testing too much is that we do test a lot less than a traditional school.
Right.
In a traditional school, children get assessments probably every day, if not every week. In many, many different subjects. So even they may be small quizzes or one or two question feedback. And this is vital for the learning process. Mm-hmm. We do have to know how the kids are doing.
That's right.
And especially for our homeschool families, it's not fair to the students not to have any familiarity with the format of the test, and then they go in and don't do as well as they really could.
Well, I would agree with that, yes. So, of course, the identifying gaps in knowledge. So not only are we saying, yes, assessment is good for retaining and retrieving content, but it also identifies those gaps.
That's right. And those are very important because they can widen the ability of the child to do higher level work later in life. Every gap is a danger later.
Sure.
And so we really need to identify those early, fill them, and personalized learning. You really can't do a good job with personalized learning without assessment.
No.
So they go hand in hand. You have to know what the children know, then you can teach them what they, move on down.
I agree. So, what are some of the things that you have been hearing, or what are you being asked about regarding assessment?
Well, I guess one question that comes up occasionally is, why, if we have iReady as an assessment, why do we need also the milestone tests?
I get that question also.
I'm sure you do. Probably more than me.
Yes. So, and we just have to remind people they're two very different tests with different purposes. So you mentioned formative assessment, right? So when we have a diagnostic, this is formative. We are going to look for those gaps, and we're going to look for the skills that students already know and then make a personalized plan, versus summative, where we know that this material has already been taught. This is not only providing information for the student, but also the teacher and the homeschool parent. Right. Did I teach what I thought I did? How are the students doing? So,
what one really kind of hones down on what the child needs, and the other one sort of hones in on what the teacher needs to do. I mean,
that
in a way.
A good way to think.
So it's really in terms of informing a data-driven, personalized curriculum for each child. You really have to have both. You have to know how you're doing with what you're teaching and what the child has retained from from previous years
Right.
and from that year.
Sure,
So-
I agree. And I think once we have these conversations, often people are satisfied with that answer. They may not like the idea that we have, these milestones that are rigorous tests.
Right.
And iReady has its own, people have their own concerns with that, but ultimately, we don't get much argument with the idea that it is important to have both summative and formative.
And the other thing to note about both the tests, both OARS and the milestone tests that were created on OARS and the iReady testing, is that it's highly researched and correlated with the standardized instruments that we have to use as a
Sure.
California public school. So it's not a waste of time. It's not giving us wrong information. It is giving us the information that we need to hone in on the target areas.
Right.
So
I think the last question that people ask that we should address is this idea that, hey, I thought you were a personalized learning school. What's up with the pacing guide?
yeah. Well, yeah, because the pacing guide makes it look like, if we have a pacing guide with the 15 ICANNs for the fourth grade, and you're like, well, I thought it was personalized learning. Well, it is. The pacing guide is talking, those 15 skills are, they're skills that can be taught through a lot of different content. So the content can be personalized to the child's interest, to the child's passions at that moment, and they change, from year to year. But the skills, really, most of the kids need those, and they're on grade level, and they can make it through. And if we don't have a pacing guide that sort of helps us to teach with some sense of urgency, they will not make a year's progress in a year. Now, not all children come in ready to make that year's progress, but
Right.
50% at least, we know, more than 50%, 75% of the kids will be able to do that content and more.
Sure.
So
Right. And I would just add that the pacing guide is a great tool for teachers they can ask themselves, am I adequately planning
Right.
for the year? Am I going to get through this? And of course, our pacing guides are not like you would get in a traditional district. We're giving this window of
Right.
when these skills need to be addressed, not
Right.
a day-to-day.
not a pacing mandate.
That's correct.
Right. Like
It's a
February
guide.
24th, we should be on this, this page and this, no.
Yes.
That's not ever the way that we're going to roll. But we do have to have some targets, because we noticed from previous years, in our early days of being a charter school, we had kids that would make a half a year's growth, and they were perfectly capable of making a whole year's growth. But if they're
Sure.
not presented with the content,
Sure.
so
So I think that at this point, this is a tool we feel is really valuable,
Right.
and a lot of people would agree. And you can personalize all around.
all around it. Absolutely.